Hello. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Mariana Pestana. I have a background in architecture, worked as a curator for different cultural organizations, mostly crossing themes around ecology, architecture, and using fiction, thinking a lot about narrative and fiction as a tool to imagine alternative futures. Today I work at the University of Técnico in Lisbon, where I teach and I do research. I have been involved with Index for a long time now. I have had the pleasure of curating two exhibition editions before, and I want to begin by thanking Luís and Joana for the program of Index as a whole, but then also to congratulate Joel, Luís, for this edition of the program. It's been really great to see the exhibitions and the talks so far in the last couple of days. And it's a pleasure to be back at Index, of course, and an honor to moderate these two extraordinary speakers that you will meet in a second. Of course, since several years now, Index has been questioning the role of technology in contemporary society, grounded always in art practice, but very often intersecting art with other forms and disciplines and forms of knowledge, partly because technology touches upon things like ecology and economy, is both light and extremely heavy and infrastructural, because it is pervasive, it invades our everyday life, and is also extractive, because it connects us and at the same time sort of is polarizing. And so technology as a field of inquiry is a subject that's been present at Index in its various editions, and always in this intersection that I think will be very interesting to discuss today. So I wanted you to pay attention to this, which is that, of course, technology is a field that pertains to science and, engineering and mathematics, but also it's a field that pertains to the humanities and to art practice. And it is through the combination of these knowledges that we want to think about it today. We live in a strange time. I think the program of this edition has been sort of making us feel that, where recent exponential technological advances have led to political divides, to the fragmentation of different social groups, rise in extremist politics, inequality, and in this time, which is known as techno-feudalism, where these technological giants seem to outweigh the old structures of power, such as national governments. In these contexts, power is redefined. So today, as we think about systems of power, we are paying attention to this kind of transition, this transformation. To bring these ideas closer to the theme of Index, I wanted to just remind the words of Joana Miranda, actually, in the context of Index, where she says, who controls these technological systems and who benefits from them, and what human and political and at what human and political and cultural cost. So today we are going to be talking about these systems of power. We want to inquire what they look like, what tools we have to think about them, and also how we could reimagine them or emancipate from them. So I have with me in my left, Georgina Voss. She is an artist, a writer. She's also an educator, and her work explores the presence of politics of large-scale technologies and heavy industry through performance, multimedia installation, visual art, and also writing. Georgina has exhibited and performed in various institutions, which will be known to you, from Transmediale to Tate Modern, Technic Museum in Berlin, and many other places. She has a PhD from the University of Sussex, and currently she's a visiting professor at the Science and Technology Studies Department at UCL in London. Georgina recently launched a book called, recently, 2 years ago, Systems Ultra. And in this book, she uses an analysis. She analyzes the infrastructures such as, services, logistics, communications, trade, to think and dissect, in a way, power relations and the role of technology in shaping our reality. So today we will hear mostly about Georgina's practice, but then we will also have an opportunity to discuss some of her writing as well in conversation. And on my right, I have Nicolas Maigret, who is also an artist, also a curator, and also an educator. He's co-founder of the art collective thisnovation.org, that you probably know him through that. And this is a platform that combines contemporary art, research, and hacking to critically translate complex eco-social debates into operational and provocative exhibitions and experiences as well. His exhibitions or books or videos have been shown in different contexts, mostly cultural venues, but in different contexts, sometimes also residencies in more technological contexts. We will talk a lot about this a little bit later. But I think what is important is that these experiences and installations foster critical dialogue at the intersection of artistic, political, and scientific research. So these are installations to raise questions mostly. So Nicolas addresses systems of power through the lens of energy and material conditions of life in the Anthropocene. And he investigates how computing, industry, and the economy depend on extractivist logics, but also they work with finite resources. So we will talk about these ideas. Each of them will do a presentation of 15 minutes. We will start with Georgina and then follow with Nicolas. And then we'll follow that with a brief, conversation. We have a little bit of time for a conversation. And then open to you. We had conversations before, and I think both Georgina and Nicolas are really curious to know what your take on this is as well. So, what I know that we have an audience that is in part very connected with these subjects as well, and we would love to hear from you also what's your experience and your take on these subjects. So please save your questions to the end or comments, and we were hoping that this could be, we could really open the conversation to everybody. More like a round discussion, although we are here on top of this stage and it's a bit strange when we're discussing systems of power, but this is what we have. So I think that's it. We will leave Georgina on stage. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. And we'll be back. All right. Can you hear me all right? We're good? All right. I feel very much like welcome to Masterpiece Theatre. Let me take you on a journey of discovery. But also let's find out if I can work this. Wait. So thank you so much, Mariana, for the very generous introduction, and thank you so much to the festival organisers for the extremely generous invitation to be here. It's genuinely a delight, having kind of watched Index from afar for many years, to now be here on a high stage. So I'm very excited about that. So I'm going to speak to you briefly about my practice and then about two specific, projects that I think speak to the themes of systems of power that we're going to be talking about today, and that also kind of run through and resonate through the festival this year at large and through the lives that we are living at this particular point in time. So I'm an artist and a writer. I have led two creative studios, Super System Studio at University of the Arts London, which looked at creative practice and critical interventions with technology, particularly from an educational perspective, and Strange Telemetry, which worked with speculative design approaches to think about understanding complex technological systems, particularly through governance and public spaces. I don't come from an arts and humanities and design background originally. I originally trained in first biochemistry and then later on economics and anthropology, and then made the jump into art and design practice. So a lot of what I do has been very, I guess, inflected, influenced by working in these spaces and seeing and feeling how they operated, and then thinking about how might you use different approaches, other approaches, to make interventions, to make work to be serious and slightly ridiculous in other spaces too. My practice has spanned many different forms. I think, just going around in a circular way, there has been multimedia performance in the top left. This was a performance piece thinking about how people intersect with vision systems in different technologies through the lens of automotive visioning. Wild Spirits, this was a piece that was built around the internal business-to-business marketing of the adult entertainment industry, and this constant, if you look back through 20 years of archives, this constant search for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and it's going to be CD-ROMs and it's going to be the internet, and then it never lands, but they keep trying. In the top right is Resonance, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, another multimedia performance. Bottom right is the Mare Island extension kit that was created through an artist residency in San Francisco that was using digital fabrication to think about the military history of the San Francisco area and how that moved and became present in contemporary technology culture. The little machines there are the photogrammetry scans of tools that were used in a naval shipyard in San Francisco that had then, as the shipyard closed, as the nature of warfare had changed, had been sold on to different places around the Bay Area, including museums. And I found these machines that had originally been military and scanned them and printed them. Another book that was produced with one of my studios, Super Systems, and another performance that I will mention, Bigger Than Before, and actually another performance as well, Blue Probably, from Transmediale a few years ago, that was a horror story about working in a large company. My book came out 2 years ago, Systems Ultra, and this was a kind of way of trying to think through writing around a lot of what systems feel like, and also the pushing back at the idea of systems being large, controllable, or controlled, unknowing, complex, out of our reach, of what does it look like and feel like if you kind of come at them at a journalistic road trip type perspective. As Mariana says, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the discussion. So the first piece I want to briefly touch on, this is a piece called Resonance that I made originally in 2017. It was produced for TAC Eindhoven, which is sited in a former light bulb factory. And I'd been thinking about the war of the currents, the battle for technological supremacy between Edison and Tesla, and between two competing models of electrical systems, essentially. And had been thinking about where showmanship comes into how technologies take hold. It's not about a logic necessarily, it's not about need, but about performance. And then had been thinking about contemporary, I guess, technology CEOs and the types of performances that they offer on stage, through marketing. So this performance was a piece that, with a single product launch, ran it in real time, but I kind of channeling parts of the CEO through this, of speaking with him, speaking over him, having a live camera, so my hand gestures were mimicking him, having the kind of the very soaring tech soundtrack running over it, and then cutting the vision so the audience were left in the dark just with this very impressive music of tech, and then having it all collapsing and coming back together again. And at that point in 2017, this was a piece of work that felt that it spoke to where the kind of the digital tech industries were, particularly at that point in time, of pervasive, slightly idiotic, something was rumbling there, but in 2017, the kind of performances felt like I could trace a line back to Thomas Edison being, a consummate showman, and Nikola Tesla being very reclusive. And then things continued, the world continued, and as we've heard, we are increasingly in spaces of control, of tech feudalism, and suddenly that piece became much less comfortable for me to think about and to go to. So in January of this year, I reworked it as resonance, this time with less linearity and far more emotional stress of thinking about what are these things when they just keep repeating and repeating, and we think we're criticizing a technological system, but actually the thing just keeps happening. How does it work when we see the same forms of narrative, the same modes of persuasion, but now we're actually in quite a different world, and these things are operating at a different scale and to a different political end. So remember this picture, we will come back to it. The second performance I want to talk about was one called Bigger Than Before. And again, this was both site-specific and space-specific. This was commissioned for a festival that it was meant to be in Utrecht in the Netherlands. The festival was called Rainbow's End, run by Creative Coding. They were running it in 2021, which, as we will remember, was at a point during the pandemic when lockdowns were happening. So when this festival was meant to be happening in real time, and we were meant to go over and perform as people on stages and do performance, suddenly it became apparent that was not going to happen, and we had to change everything to being online, and not only online but mediated through a screen. So the work I'd been thinking about at that point had been about scale and technology. This was part of a kind of a larger project that fed into the book project too, of how we respond to scale, both in kind of sublime ways, it can be overwhelming, but also how the emotions around scale and technology can be deployed and weaponized. And Bigger Than Before was a nod to a meme, which I'll let you look that one up, it's fine. But one where I'd started thinking, well, how, if I'm going to be doing this on a screen in my flat during a semi-lockdown in London as it was then, and it's going to be watched by an audience through a screen, how do we start thinking about what scale is? Do you get that kind of sense of the technological sublime through a screen and the politics of it? So this was, if not an attempt at it, but trying to have these elements of it. It was, again, set around a different part of the Netherlands through a residency I'd done there in the port of Rotterdam, which has picture there is the automated part of this port, which again is something automation based on scale to try and get cargo through more quickly because of more rapid supply chains and more need for things and stuff to keep flowing. You have the different types of machinery that are built at a scale to meet this service of speed, particularly and under the underlying logics of capitalism. And you have the humans involved for the dangerous fiddly bits that you can't automate yet. But this also happened at the same time that the Ever Given container ship had been trapped in the Suez Canal that I was pulling this. You may remember this, a very large container ship that got wedged in a canal. And at the same time I was thinking about scale, there was also this extra running narrative of scale that was running through the internet and memes. There were people writing adult fiction, we might say, about the container ship trapped in the Suez Canal. We have things of the Mediterranean. These are kind of phrases for this fiction. The Mediterranean Sea, anthropomorphic. Ever Given is only mentioned. Don't blame me. Why am I doing this? I ship the Mediterranean Sea and the Suez Canal so hard. Human creativity is a magical and wonderful thing, and the internet can enable it. And there were all these as well as this, there were all these memes that were coming out at the same time that I mentioned in the presentation, in the performance, I guess. This one was a kind of a lookbook for the Steal His Look, the cargo ship blocking the Suez Canal. You too can look like the Evergreen. You can get a very expensive Lorraine cardigan. You can get Dolce & Gabbana jeans. You can get a sticker that you put on a wheelie bin, and then you have his look. And I'd been fascinated by the fact that these memes, there was this thing of this is about global shipping. This is not super exciting. It does impact on our lives, but how are people, not even sense making, but approaching it? And so there was a part that was quite direct, and then there was a part that was the understanding that it was also quite funny. This was happening in 2021. You may remember this image of a tiny digger that was trying to kind of get the silt away from the bottom of the ship with the lines, the crushing despair of everything from the past year, 2020, and you doing your best. So this way that these kind of large complex systems could also have this moment of speaking to what was happening in society, and what was happening with this very specific bit of global logistics. I don't know how many people would have been able to point to the Suez Canal on a map until that point, but they could make memes. And then everything repeats, not quite in the same way. This is a screen grab taken from Marine Traffic, a live shipping tracker from a day ago. You may recognize this. This is not the Suez Canal. This is the Strait of Hormuz, which has been closed for a while now. It's a while. We've got the kind of ships that are trapped there. And I had seen this, and I had also seen, again, online people saying, it's happening again. It's like it is happening again, but it's not happening again. I think I'd seen someone saying, it's like getting the prelude episode which sets up the world building for the world. So now when you go back to see that a part of global supply chains have been blocked, you know what's happening. You know the main characters. You know what it is. And once again, there were kind of memes or images have like risen up from this of people engaging with this complex part of global systems. Only this time it is different. Whereas the previous ones may have been more humorous because the Ever Given ship, when it got stuck, it was funny. It was big. It got stuck because of things around fluid dynamics and airflow, which I can go into in the Q&A. This has been shut for very political reasons. And so the type of response to this is different. This has been one of how do you get ships through there? Well, this is in response, like, can you not just open it and this kind of, just cut and paste them, just get the ships over the strait. Like, you can do that. This might be a bit more specific to some of you. You can approach the strait, you can collect your star, and then you can power through whilst invulnerable. So again, this is kind of this collapse of these moments of how sense-making, you can make sense, or not even make sense, but engage with these complex systems and the politics of them through these forms. And these forms meet each other as well. There had been a talk that although container ships and defense ships have not been able to get through, a cruise ship somehow managed to get through the strait, leading to this particular meme of the hench dog. If I explain it, it's not funny, but I'm just going to have to describe it. If you're listening to this in the translation, I'm sorry, it's not funny even in translation. We have the hench dog, so hench, that is the massive cruise ship, and then we have the sad, little, so weak dog, which is, the battleship. Funnier, not explained. You have the intersection of the politics of it. Someone says, this is kind of the Arthur clenching his fist meme, when you have to block the Strait of Hormuz because they blocked the Strait of Hormuz, but the hand is very small. So we have that kind of nod into American politics. And then we have repetition, because it's all happening again. That the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the Strait of Hormuz is open, the Strait of Hormuz is closed. These memes have a different flavor. They are not the kind of the playful ones. The playful ones of 2021, it was not a playful time. But there's kind of this way of engaging with a complex system, which is now the political leveling of it is very, very present in the engagement with it. I mentioned the repetition. So, like I said, in January this year, I came back to a performance that I had done to kind of try and rework it and try and make it ultimately much more stressful for the audience. I'm not sure if that's a kind thing to do, but the original performance of Resonance had been funny in ways. I guess this one had been funny in ways, but this was one that kind of ran again in real time of the same original launch, but now kind of chopped up and moved around in a way that felt much more disarming and that also felt like it didn't make as much sense, where we had, again, the kind of original CEOs still moving, still gesticulating, but now present and present and present. And I'd been thinking about how do you think about this? How do you think about the presence of a system, the presence of the technologies in it? And when I'd been pulling it together, I'd been thinking, you have the ticking of a clock, and I'm looking at the ticking of a clock for the time of this, that kind of. And then I'd thought about metronomes, the kind of the boxes that keep time, kind of. I'm getting some nods, so I think we get what this is. And I'd been looking up to think about, could I find a sound file of a metronome? And I'm just like, just buy a metronome. Just buy a metronome. If you want to make your audience distressed, you will enjoy having a metronome. So this is, I think, is the thing that I kind of want to end on and hand over to Nicolas, of where these technological systems that just keep on coming and keep on happening, and how we can both intervene and make them present and think about them and work both in kind of high-tech and low-tech ways, that knowing that constantly in the background we still have these things that are still there. Thank you so much. I'll see you in about 15 minutes. I'll hand over to Nicolas.
All right, so I will go through the research that we've been conducting with the collective, looking at power from a specific perspective, which is the perspective of energy. And we will see how it resonates with systemic issues. So yeah, the collective is active for the last 14 years. It's changing geometry and scale. Basically, we are conducting investigations mostly and building teams with experts from different disciplines, depending on the concerns we are approaching. And I will look at a series of works that we've been developing since 2018. Basically, at this time, we were invited at the University of California in Irvine, and we wanted to, sort of embrace the issues that we were going through as a society, where the questions of the limits of the growth-minded system became more and more apparent. The limits of the energy system we depend upon were more and more important, and so on. So we wanted to sort of explore how we could make sense of these conditions, of these current conditions that as a society we were going through, by starting by interviewing people from many different disciplines and backgrounds. So we started conducting interviews with people from anthropology, philosophy, STS, indigenous knowledge, activists, and so on, with sort of the same question all the time: is what in their work are they developing, using, conceptualizing, that helps to make sense of the connection between economic growth on one hand and ecological crisis on the other hand. Our intuition was that looking at this perspective, this friction space between economic growth and ecological crisis, could maybe help us make sense of our current condition. So that's the process. And we started in a pretty simple way, which is by basically collecting the most striking and interesting notions that emerged from this series of interviews. And we circulated those things through, like many different tactics, just releasing the video interview for free online, as cards, as a website, as printed material. And yeah, it went pretty okay, but we were frustrated at some point by the level of consequences that circulating good notions, important notions, key concepts can achieve. In a way, like, we will talk about that during the discussion, but in a way, like, on a daily basis, we are reflecting on what are the means and the tactics we use to achieve things in the world, to sort of produce some waves, some change, some effects. And it's never satisfying, it's never satisfying. So we started to reflect on what this collection of notion can achieve. And we started exploring a game, basically developing kind of a game as an excuse to have people sitting around a table, having quality time, and exploring the depth of those notions, how they can activate it, how they can appropriate it, and how they can have like let's say just an hour-long quality time of discussion, debating, grasping the complexity of those questions, and sometimes also the paradoxical and incompatibility of those notions and principles and plans. So that's kind of the framework. And through this framework, I will just focus on some of the projects that came out of this series of investigation. So the first one is kind of old, but I think it's good to look at power and systems. It's basically that we wanted to explore deeper the relation between energy, fossil energy, and human labor. And often, like nowadays, we talk about the technosphere. So the technosphere is, supposed to be the aggregate of all the technological devices, infrastructure that we are depending upon. And obviously, the technosphere is not eating mushrooms and tomatoes and so on. It's eating fossil fuel, mostly, right? 80% of it is fossil fuel. So the metabolism of our society is running through a bit of electricity, but mostly fossil. And we wanted to find ways to grasp this notion and to circulate that in a strong way. So one of the thing that we thought was quite interesting to manipulate was this deep connection between how much how much fossil fuel you put into this technosphere, into the societal machine. If you consider our society as a big, complex aggregate of technological devices and industrial complex and so on, it's running on fossil fuel. So if you think about economics through this lens, the quantity of fossil fuel you will put in the system will directly impact the growth. So we thought it's an interesting angle to go through. And basically, if you think about the way you are, like affecting the world around you, like in physics, energy is the capacity of affecting the world around you. And if you think about nowadays, the way you affect the world around you, it's not anymore through the use of your arm and legs and body power, like just a minor part of it is affected through your own body power. Like the vast majority of it, like 300 times more, is the quantity of all the things you put into motion around you through the technosphere, the industrial device, transport, heating, construction, all the complex dependencies of industrial age. So one of the ways we started to embrace that was through the notion of Buckminster Fuller, the notion of energy slave. So it's a notion he developed in the 40s. Already in the 40s, he was impressed by the way that his contemporary citizens were not able to grasp this dependency on industrial systems and energy inputs. So he came with this idea of the energy slave. Energy slave is a unit to translate this abstraction, to translate the idea that most of the way we affect the world is through other energy sources and other systems than the body capacity of our own body. So he came with this unit, which is an energy slave. It's a way to translate our modern fossil fuel use into equivalent number of human laborer. So we did the kind of calculation based on the best effort we could achieve. Usually in the early 20th century, it's been evaluated that 75 watt was what like a laborer could achieve on the long term. If you have somebody working at the factory or working in a like assembly line, 75 watt is what you can achieve per hour on a continuous duration. And we developed this series of objects that are basically materialization of unit of times of human labor into fossil fuel equivalent. So here you can see the smallest one is 1 hour, then 1 day, 1 week, 1 year. So the 1 year you can see is about 40 centimeter large, and it's the equivalent of 30 liters of fossil fuel. So 1 year of human laborer, basically working 5 days a week, 7 hours a day, with the whatever 5 weeks holiday in the year and so on. That's the quantity of mechanical effort you can achieve is the equivalent of 30 liters of fossil fuel. I just leave it here for now. And as I said, like energy, if you see energy as the capacity to transform the world, obviously when you are circulating so much energy around us, you end up transforming the world quite a bit. And actually the level at which we are right now, we could consider it even like a moment, an historical moment where absolutely everything around us has been artificialized to different degree, different scale, different nature. But from the clouds that contains microplastic to the most remote island which has radiation, to the banana that you had for breakfast that is a clone, you can see artificiality at every scale, every degree. And we wanted to develop a project that can manifest, can embrace this planetary artificiality. So we started this collaboration with the anthropologist Nicolas Maigret, which is called the Bestiary of the Anthropocene. So it's basically a field guide, but a weird field guide that helps us recognize the absolute artificiality of the living around us, from the vegetal to the mineral to the animal and to all the other things that don't fit in the old school classical classification of Carl von Linné, like clouds, mushrooms, bacteria, all of that. So we basically did a sort of collection of specimens that each of them embraces a specific type of hybridity, a specific way in which, as humans, we are affecting the world around us. So both like in a deliberate way, like GMO, or indirect way, like pollution, waste, and so on. So the book takes this shape. It's structured in two parts. One part is more like the list of specimens with, almost like a naturalist drawing and a naturalist description, where we can find those things, how we recognize them, how they came about in this way. I will go quick on that, but the book is available and you can find it online as well. And we started to develop installations around this project that show the specimens and also found footage from those hybrid entities in the wild, in real context. All right. I just want to spot on two other notions that I think are interesting, looking at systems and powers. So basically, we live inside life support relations all the time. And economic narratives that we are using on a daily basis are not really able to help us describe and narrate this dependency. Because the economic system we are using consider that natural inputs are infinite, and therefore they don't have value. And we don't really have the words to describe the immensity of the relation we have with the ecosystems. So we decided to develop a project that do the best we can to translate this issue into a physical experience. So here you can see a 1 square meter of wheat culture, totally separated from the ecosystems. So it's paradoxical. You have one square meter of wheat to make bread, and it's totally separated from ecosystems. Therefore, you need to create a life support system. So you can see 1 cubic meter of water, artificial sun, artificial wind, artificial nutrients. So it's fully dependent. So visually it's very strong, but you can also start to play the game of economics and measure how much it will cost if we had no ecosystems or very damaged ecosystems. And when you play this game, actually, it's empirical. It's very we actually measure the cost for the exhibition space, right? And you end up with a cost which is anywhere between 200 and 400 euros for a kilogram, meaning about 1,000 times above the market price. And the idea is not to say we should pay that price every day at the market or when we buy some pasta or something. The idea is to confront the audience with the order of magnitude of what we are not able to understand and to grasp through contemporary means of economics understanding, economic valuation, and so on. So this project has been shown around, and here is the end of the harvesting performance at Ars Electronica 4 years ago or 5 years ago. The last project I want to showcase quickly is, continuing in this reflection. We were quite interested by, degrowth thinkers, post-growth thinkers. And through the interviews we conducted, we realized that, okay, if we really want to look at the questions of planetary limits from an energetical point of view, quickly enough you end up looking at sunlight. Because if you think about the Earth system as a sort of a closed system, the only renewable thing, the only new input in terms of energy is the energy of the sun. And the way the photons, the way the energy of the sun is slowed down is through photosynthesis. It's captured through living matter and kept on the ground. And that's how life sustains itself in a way. So sunlight can be seen as an interesting entry point to look at the limits of the energy budget. If you see economics as a flow of energy, as a metabolism, then looking at photosynthesis is an interesting entry point to address planetary limits. So we developed an experiment which is a square meter of spirulina culture. And basically it's a way to not measure like an average, but measure like an empirical input here in a specific city at a specific day, we can have a daily harvest and explore what is the quantity of new energy that has been captured here. And we use that just as a starting point for a larger discussion. So here you can see like a planetary map of the photosynthesis. It's what we consider as the planetary budget. Basically, those theories have been around for a couple of centuries, but since the early 2000s, you have ways to confirm and to observe that process through satellite data. So it's called net primary productivity, and it's basically the new energy that is produced by photosynthetic organisms all around the globe. And obviously this budget is not shared in evenly distributed around the globe. So we talk about solar wealth transfer, like some people talk about interspecies wealth transfer. So obviously, yeah, it's not well distributed. You have different places around the globe where there is more productivity, different places around the globe where there is more appetite for consumption. And there is this question that arrives that is about basically the appropriation of this photosynthetic wealth by humanity. And this appropriation is growing since the early days of the industrial age. We are appropriating about a quarter of photosynthetic production, and another quarter is the equivalent of all the fossil fuel we are using. So it's about the equivalent of half of all photosynthesis produced. That is the energy budget of humanity in a way. Yeah, so what we do with this little experiment is basically on a daily basis we harvest part of the reactor, we filter it, then we compress it into units that are edible and that have intrinsic value. They have calories. Those calories make sense for us humans, but they also make sense for other beings. So that's how it is sort of monitored through the live monitoring system. So here you can see the daily productivity in Geneva at the moment. And we started to collect all of this research and knowledge and early, writings by philosophers, economists, and so on, in the form of a series of engraved diner plates. So they are ceramic plates that we engraved with historical facts and diagrams and ways of representing those flow of energies. So here you can see a plate about the human appropriation of photosynthesis, the different way in which we appropriate it. Here you can see one about the way we describe this energy flow going through sunlight to the living, the way the living complexifies itself through evolution and the use by humans. Another example is this idea of the Earth as a battery. So there is this interesting paper that considers the Earth system as a battery that is storing energy and also storing complexity with the durational process of this energy stored in life and developing itself. Yeah, so I won't go through all of those plates, but that's kind of the way that this research also has been translated over the time. I will stop here, and thank you.
Thank you both. It was great to hear you. I'm sure you all agree. So to kick us off, I wanted to ask about, I think I would like to start by talking a little bit about about the choices behind the medium that you use for your work. So the form that, in many ways, your work sort of across art practice, but education, and then also through talks such as this one and so on, helps us discern the form of these systems of power that we are talking about. These are things that are very complex, a little bit difficult to even identify often. We don't know if we are in the presence of one. and yet, they're part of everyday practice. Now, the way that you choose to do that takes a particular form as well. And I wanted to hear from you about, what the choices behind those. So maybe we could start with you, Georgina. I was thinking, for example, the choice of the performances that you make, but more so I was thinking in the book Systems Ultra. I don't know if anyone had the chance of reading it yet, but what's really fascinating, I think, about the book is that it talks about these contexts of, for example, technological fairs and places where technological devices and artifacts are shown and which are explained normally through numbers, statistics, graphics, languages that pertain more to the world of, let's say, science and technology, and you choose to talk about them from a situated, very narrative perspective. And you even said today, how do the systems of power feel? So yeah.
Gosh, okay, just checking also mic, okay. I'm going to start with the book. I think that's easiest, and probably just face you rather than face you, but it's nothing rude. For the book, I'd always known I wanted it to be written in a narrative first-person style. That's kind of narrative stuff. I would like to say it's a good way for thinking about systems, but it's kind of how stuff works in my brain. I can kind of narrative makes sense to me, and also for building performances. Mm-hmm. You can then mess around with narrative and kind of chop it up or do something, but like the idea of kind of how do we get from here to here to here, or here to here to here to here, it's just when I'm figuring stuff out, it makes sense. For the writing of the book, I'd known I wanted it. It had been drawn from, I guess, like the offcuts of quite a lot of artistic research projects and other pieces of work as well, and some earlier social and economic research projects where I'd done all this work and I'd turned it into a performance or a thing, and there was suddenly like a lot left over. A bit like when you're cooking and there's like, you're suddenly like, but I've got 3 artichokes left, like what, how? And I knew that I wanted to do something with it. I remember years ago reading a book by an politics writer, an economics and politics writer who is an American called P.J. O'Rourke, who is interesting for being a right-leaning writer who wrote for Rolling Stone. So that was his framework of being the Republican in a sea of lefties. And he writes fantastically. He's very, very funny. He wrote a book that was about economic theory that I read when I was about 13 because I know how to have a good time. And he laid it out. It was kind of like different models of economic practice and policy, and he was funny, and he went to different parts of the world where different economic systems worked, and he reported back, and it was slightly ridiculous in the way that Rolling Stone writers were in the 1980s, particularly if they were men. But he wrote, and it was entertaining, and I was like, oh my God, I can kind of understand this quite dry theory through you not just only explaining it to me, but kind of taking me on this journey. And there had been a level, I think, through my teaching where we talked about this a little earlier, I had taught ethics to engineering students, and engineering students do not always want to be taught ethics. Like, that's not really what they've come to study. So there was definitely something about having to stand up in a very large lecture hall of several hundred undergraduate engineering students who did not want to be there, and not being like, we're going to be looking at Marx today, we're going to be thinking about Kant, you have to, there had to be that entertainment to carry them through for 2-hour lectures, and I don't know who scheduled them, but that was how long they were. So along the way, that kind of sense of not only entertainment, not only being like, but also like what narrative can do, what grounding things in experience can do, what kind of really getting people involved in kind of things that kind of, even if it doesn't speak their experience, that makes them want to kind of see and read more. And so for the writing of the book, I'd kind of, that part of it, I think of, like I said, the minute you try and explain humor, it's not funny, but to have it be funny, and to have it be fast, and to have it hit the ground running. I remember pitching it to my editor at the very beginning, and I was like, it's going to be so funny, it's just going to be full of like banter. And he was like, Verso does not publish banter. And I was like, all right, okay, we will not be funny, be very serious, serious book. For other forms, I mean, maybe we can hand over to Nicola here, but I think there's kind of a lot of the stuff I've made, I think actually everything has if it's been a commission, it's been thinking about the site and the space of it. I think I mentioned that with the kind of the online work, the kind of work with digital fabrication. And if it's been something I've been pitching or kind of thinking about those things together, even if it hasn't always been about the space, the place it's happening in, there's some moment, something that is happening there historically, or even is it going to happen in an enormous fancy lecture theatre, or a theatre like Theatre Circo last night? So what does that mean for how you construct that space? I think that part of it. I think when I've tried to make work and tried to think, well, I wanted to think audiences to think about or engage with this aspect of the system. So what are the tools I've got? It never comes that way around. It always comes from the kind of what have we got? What have we got to work with? Okay, and now how do we package it in that way?
Mm-hmm. I was thinking as well. We'll get to you in a minute, but just. In relation to the book, for those of you who haven't read it, for example, one of the things that the book does very brilliantly, in my opinion, is that it traces back the history of, what systems, how were systems formulated, and it starts with Galileo, one of the first humans to have access to a telescope, looking at a system of moons of Jupiter and then making a parallel with Earth and saying, okay, here's a system. And then a critique that Georgina draws about like how systems sort of in this context of science and technology have evolved as a way of totalizing, and in a way sort of totalizing narratives that flatten reality and box up reality into things that are very easy to understand, but what they do is they leave the messiness away. Right, so I was thinking that in the way that you choose to then write about these systems, in some ways, by bringing up the fun, the humor, which the book is funny, by the way, it is funny and in like humorous, but that you bring back this human messiness, and I was wondering if that's
I think
intentional. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things I mentioned previously. Not starting in art and design, starting somewhere else. And it's always, bits of human life are always interesting and weird and funny, and people have been behaving like idiots or doing ridiculous things for a long time. And you see how that gets manifested through human history. So that part of human culture, which is a tendency to humor, a tendency to tell jokes, a tendency for things to be ridiculous because they are ridiculous. And oftentimes when they're really bad, they can be extra ridiculous. Like I come from a family of medical doctors, and like the medical humor, man, from doctors who are dealing with terrible things. Like it's not funny, but they've got the jokes, right? So that stuff is there. And then you layer history into that as well. That magic trick of like this technology is just clean and has come out of nowhere, and like don't look too closely, is a really neat way of kind of closing off the past and therefore closing off the future as well. It implies a certainty that is absolutely not there. The future is there to play for. And this is different, I think, from the kind of more, maybe, the nationalistic kind of nostalgic uses of history to imply a very specific path or a returning to the past to get there. But the kind of the same flattening element denies the possibility of the complexity of human history, the complexity of those who are not in power, the complexity of how people behave, and to bring that back and be this like, look, there are multiple voices here at play. There are multiple ways of thinking about these systems, often in ways that are deeply strange. And even if they're not strange, they may not be the thing at hand. To be able to kind of like bring out that, and I think that in ways pushing against both the narrative and the aesthetics of these technologies quite a lot. I think that's also, I've just very briefly, I think with some exceptions like the digital fabrication work, a lot of my work has been quite low tech to come back to kind of practice, which is not to say that if you gave me some gigantic screens and some projectors, I would be so happy. Like the largest, most ridiculous digital art you can imagine. Like I'd be delighted. But I kind of like being able to work with forms that are not directly related to the thing at hand.
Yeah. Thanks. And so to turn to you, Nicola, I was thinking, of course, the bestiary of the Anthropocene, the book that you've seen presented, the bestiary itself is a narrative typology that is pre-modern, pre-industrial. And it anticipates the encyclopedia, for example, which then happens in the Enlightenment and is already sort of, let's say, the beginning of this history that Georgina was talking about. The choice of doing a bestiary and not an encyclopedia, could you talk us through that? And then maybe also, I like that you use the term experiment when you talk about your work and not, or perhaps you interchange that with art installation, but you like to use the idea of an experiment, which to me makes it sound like it's happening, something that's happening not quite in the gallery space, not quite in the laboratory, but somewhere in between.
Yeah, sure. So earlier today you were asking if we qualify what we do as a design fiction. And actually it's interesting because we never ask ourselves these kind of things. I mean, we are not really disciplinary or academic, and we don't really reflect as starting with a, thinking from a site or from a category. We do the opposite of that. Basically, we are just human beings, we are concerned by things, like deeply concerned by real topics that we are thinking about. And from there, we are thinking, what is the best we can achieve, like to just talk, make better discussions about that, make people embrace this complexity in an interesting way, or bring interesting perspective on the table and put that in the world, So I think most of the project and the way we decide of a form for a project or another starts from this way of thinking. So the bestiary, we would have been frustrated from having just an art exhibition that is presented in 5 places with 200 audience every time, Like a topic like that needs to circulate in other places than just the art space. It needs to enter in friction with like students, with old school anthropologists, with people from the life science, with whatever, your neighbor. And thinking about it as a book and as a quite visual book, like the book has almost 50% of it is just image and illustrations. Thinking of it somehow like halfway between a comics and a theory book makes it able to circulate and to resonate and to also to be strong visually and to be used in journals, articles, whatever. And that's a tactics for me in the way to think of something as thinking at its potential to circulate and resonate and like echo in the cultural chamber in a way. So I guess the different projects are made in this series of choices.
Yeah, I meant what I wanted to get at is that even though it may be more or less conscious, but of course the format of the things you do will speak a certain way because of the typology that you choose. And I thought it was interesting because you had a toolkit, a board game, and those, and then the bestiary, as you said, a tactical object to circulate information. All of these seem to belong to these like tactical, worlding that in some ways trespasses what are perhaps the more sort of institutional, the more authoritarian structures of knowledge. And it seems like your work, by giving it these names, titles, and means of circulation, that you're trying to somehow navigate in between. And one of the things we talked about was this idea. It came across yesterday as well, and for those of you who were at the talk yesterday, it kind of reminded me of that. There's this beautiful sentence by Michel de Certeau, who is a Jesuit priest and social scientist, that says, "What the map cuts, the story cuts across." Right? So you get this sense of, he writes about that in a book called The Practice of Everyday Life. It's a long time ago, in the 1980s, but what he's getting at is trying to make a distinction between what are strategies, which are, in his description, the means in which those in power sort of shape reality, and what are the tactics, that is, what are the ways in which those that are the weak have to circumvent those previously set up structures. And Michel Certeau talks about this in different scales of the city and so on. Nowadays, as we think about technology, we are facing a very different paradigm, right? Because these structures of power are no longer that visible and that recognizable. Important people don't wear suits anymore. The big tech companies don't have huge buildings that with the scary facades. They sometimes happen in a weird garage, and so it's more and more difficult to distinguish between what are these systems of or these strategies and what are the tactics. So I thought perhaps we could follow with this if you have any comments on how do we navigate this complex coexistence almost?
I'm going to start with something that I think we did talk about earlier. I'll start with something we talked about earlier that I kind of want to bat back now that we're here. I think we'd been thinking about who gets to have strategy and tactics. I think one example we'd been, as someone who writes and who makes visual work, there is an enormous presence, increasingly so, of AI-related tools in the landscapes that I'm in. It's not something that I use, it's not something that I would want to use, but it's there. It was a particularly grim feeling after doing a book talk that a woman who came up to me afterwards and she was like, "Did you use AI to write that?" I was like, "No." God, but the question was there. And we'd be thinking about who, and with students as well, of how, what are the underlying kind of, obviously, not motivational, that makes it sound like a TED talk, but the underlying incentive and stress and systems that are pushing use of these tools or existence in these systems. It's not as simple as simply opting out of it, but a question of who gets to opt out and how. Yeah. And I think the example I briefly mentioned, I'll share it here because I'd be interested in folks' thoughts, was relaying this point I'd mentioned about the question about did you use AI to write this, and me being like, no, to a friend who lives in the UK and for whom English is not their first language, and they live and work in the UK, they are not English, they speak English, but it's not their first language. And my friend said, but I do use these tools. I use them to craft emails because I need to, when I'm trying to communicate with English institutions, British institutions, in an increasingly hostile environment, I need to get it right. There isn't any room for error. I need to be able to craft an email that sounds convincing, that doesn't have any grammatical slippages, that doesn't, sound like I am a person who is not from the UK, although I am not from the UK. And so this idea of opting out and kind of the pressure that is there, I think we've been talking about, who gets to be imperfect, who gets to have there's a lot of talk in I think the spaces that we're in and many of us are in about trying to encourage friction, encourage, a step away from this enforced slipperiness of these kind of tools, but who is able to step away from them, who has that privilege in their systems. So that part of it, when we think about systems and tactics, and having also kind of looked again at Certeau, of thinking about where are the interventions, what are the risks involved here? And particularly for risks, this is not just here is the risk within the scale of your village, but when you leave your village, off you shall go. But to, again, as with the talks yesterday, things that are cross-border, international, that operate through logics and platforms that are not contained, or not contained as they may previously have been.
Do you have anything to say on that? You don't have to.
I lost track of it.
Okay, don't worry. But yeah, I suppose we were discussing, what the access to being, to be tactical, to sort of operate at the margin in a way, sometimes requires a sacrifice of a safe place, and so not everybody is always able to do that. But I was thinking perhaps you could talk us through a little bit, in your work, the idea of tactics when you delineate, for example, an alternative economic system through energy. I think in your work you tend to materialize, ideas and questions, and in a way to make them so tangible that we can articulate the question ourselves, which is a generous act. And perhaps you could tell us about this. I think there's almost like an element of literacy in the work that you do, that is, in this understanding, could be understood as a tactical tool.
Yes, so I guess so some of the project I've been going this direction, basically to think of what is a domain of knowledge, understanding, complexity, issues that we feel we don't understand properly ourselves, and our peers don't understand it so properly as well. And maybe there are ways to investigate this topic and then translate the outputs not in a theoretical way, but through an embodiment, through what we call an eloquent object. So basically translating complex tensions and paradoxes into an object that, or a situation that speaks for itself, that uncovers sort of lot of tension and complexity, but not through language, through more of situation.
You mentioned that, for example, in the bestiary of the Anthropocene, this catalogue of very strange, sort of artificial things of today, that certain people thought that they were fictional. Like a lot of people didn't believe that there was such thing as a tree antenna, or and so part of like making it tangible has to do with this sort of spreading the knowledge that such things really do exist, which is interesting because in these original bestiaries of the medieval ones, also certain things were real but not real, like certain monsters were sort of, there was a lot of doubt about whether these things were real or not. Sometimes they were descriptions coming from very far away, animals that the people writing the bestiary didn't have knowledge about. Sometimes they were really fictional creatures. But here you're saying, no, it's important that these things are real, they exist, they're factual, and we want you to know about them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so we were talking about it a few days ago. Basically, the first few times during about a year or two when we were touring the bestiary, people will come to us and say, oh, it's so interesting, all those speculative hybrid creatures and all the merging between technology and whatever. And we're like, oh, you didn't actually got the project because it's all real things. All of this exists and they are around you like now. Those the clone banana, you just had it for breakfast, and the GMO soy as well, and this mutation of dog, you also have it in your at your neighbor. So we were kind of frustrated by the fact that people didn't got most of that, and we started to actually collect these artifacts or things that can help embrace the fact that those things exist around us. And as well, the video I mentioned, I couldn't play it, but the video of the bestiary is exactly for that. Like it's just found footage of people interacting with these hybrid things, like the plastiglomerate, which is this kind of, new mineral composed from a mix of shells, sand, and garbage that is on the shore. And those things can happen through the digestive process of oceans that are kind of mixing in a way that you cannot really separate anymore what is plastic, artificial, and natural, or through like fires. When you make a fire next to the beach, and then you end up with those hybrid things. So it's just an example, but all of those things, we are surrounded by it all of the time, and you have them in your body right now, like all the chemicals, and even when you drink water from the tap, you have a mix of contraceptive and chemicals and so on, and all of that is running through your body right now, and will run then in in the water system, in the fish that you will eat after tomorrow, and so on. It's all a continuum, you know. So you can think about it as a sort of like an alienation process that is going through all of the Earth system, and we are just a continuum of this process. We are the driver of it, maybe, but it's like a sort of shared negative common that we are all contributing and digesting daily.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So I think we can open for questions. If you, I have many questions, but time is running. So does anybody have a comment or a question that they would like to make? Aha. We have a question from Luis. Yes, thank you.
Hello, thank you. Well, I know Nicolas' work and Georgina work pretty well, and what strikes me when I deal with your work is that how much unaware I am of many things. Mm-hmm. And then there's the other part, which is while I am struck by what you present and I'm like sensitive, this system we live in kind of forces us to quickly discard that information and keep business as usual. So I have two questions. First, can you elaborate how your research is done? Because it's obviously very important to the facts that you shed light to. And if you have any advice for us to kind of maybe taking the lead that you are providing us with, change a little bit our posture over things. That's it. Maybe it's difficult, but...
So two parts. How does the research get done, and then helpful advice. How the research gets done. It's been a long-standing thing. I think having jumped across different disciplines and had many jobs and worked in different fields, there's been just this long pattern or this long chunks of stuff that I'm not going to say hoarding, but I've just been keeping hold on for a very long time. And so that's the stuff I was researching, say, nearly 25 years ago, my gosh, which some of it I have lost in various house moves, but the ideas have been there, and it's just been stuff from, even also from projects which have seemingly been a decade ago, would seem to be unrelated to approaching them through art and design and through and writing, even if it's been about, again, this is when I was working in policy, like an EU policy framework project on X, Y, Z. The idea is interesting, and there's something that's kept there. And I think the common theme there has been, there's been stuff that I have come to and experienced through research. There's stuff that I have directly experienced. There's a kind of current strand of work which I'm building out about vision and sight, which is based on my own experience with a lot of eye surgery. So it's been a lot. And I think also, like I said about human society is interesting. Being constantly interested in stuff, being almost at the stage of not even nerdily interesting, but like everything has the possibility of there being something interesting in there. And I think I remember a friend years ago saying that I made, what was it? I was interested in boring things, and I was interested in it. Let me get this right way around. I was interested, I looked at the stuff which was interesting about boring things, and I looked at the stuff that was boring about interesting things. So the stuff, that's actually quite a good metric for, and let's have that as advice as well. So the adult entertainment stuff, the early research on the pornography industry was not on performers. It was not even on labor on work in its own way. It was on business to business. It was in the archives. Were not the fun archives. They were the archives about financial modeling and adverts. And that was great. That was so interesting. But it was not the stuff that was fun. It was like not going to see the interesting things. It was like boxes of materials and thinking about business models, which was a really great way in. And the interesting part of boring things, again, like memes about a global supply chains. I mean, we all love a global supply chain now, but there's definitely, that's been, I think, a growing interest over the past decade across different, particularly infrastructure, artists and scholars and practitioners. But if you're starting with something which is functionally, which would seem to be quite boring. I was having a chat with a friend on the Vision project a few days ago who was talking about the types of vision systems you have to build in MRI, in magnetic resonance imaging machines, the big tubes. Which is functionally, it's medical instruments, maybe not so interesting, but so interesting, my God, like how you get to do this stuff without like people's heads exploding because of magnets. So those, like that intersection, I think if you want to think about something, is a really good starting point. Is there something which seems like really obviously interesting? Fine, find the boring part of it by any metric. Is there something that seems really boring? Fine, find the interesting part of it. And then where those two things meet. In terms of, I mean, it being overwhelming, and it is a lot, and it is overwhelming, and it is a lot, and I think that's kind of where the interesting, boring part comes in to kind of. We cannot and will not know everything, but having a familiarity, having like that kind of presence there, I think one thing that has always surprised me. Having been in various rooms with policymakers who are talking about the kind of advanced technologies that these festivals are structured around, and feeling like they're hitting a bit of a wall in terms of how they're thinking about it, even though from a policy perspective they know it well. And then thinking about the artists and designers I know, and the curators, and particularly the art and design students as well, who are really hot on this because you hand over to them and be like, have a think about what this technology does. How are you going to work at it? And they run at it, and they are not held by the kind of, well, I need to make a policy intervention about it. But being able to approach that loosely and creatively is a fantastic way, at least, for opening up some of these interests as well, even though it's never going to be everything, because we're not human Wikipedias. But it allows you to kind of intervene in ways that are knowable to us, I think, and are not knowable, and that are knowable across many different ways of knowing, I guess.
Yeah, and my take on that will be that most of the research we've been doing, it's very long-term things. And I would say that it's more about starting the process and starting a certain way to pay attention to a register of things in the world. Are you aware of this game from Brian Eno called Oblique Strategy? So one of the cards is once the search is started, something will be found, and it's really about that. Like when you start the process of paying attention to something, and if you have like an infinite time in front of you, I mean, it's coming. The collection is starting to accumulate. The sort of you start to see the map of the topic you're embracing. So that's one of the answers. And the other answer is that we always feel in the collective, we always feel like what we do is crap, and we are unable to embrace the topic, and we are not experts. We don't understand what we are starting to observe, and so on. So we start a new field, and we feel like we are just I don't know, like imposter, and you start collecting and exploring, listening to interviews, looking at scientific articles, meeting with people, with researchers, and so on. And at some stage, it happened many times to us. You discuss with actual scientists. You start to understand how they work. You talk to them about an article you read. They just laugh because they consider this article is crap, because it's been made on a sample of 30 people or 60 people, and they make deduction upon that and so on. And then you start to realize that like a good enough methodology as a group of artists is already very very structured. Even compared to some of the scientific methodology. So for instance, we're collaborating with the Institute of Complex System Science, and they were explaining us that most of the papers that are published in the last 5 to 10 years, they are meta-analysis, meaning that you don't really know the methodology of the 200 papers you are analyzing, but you are building deduction on this set of papers. So then you end up, with papers that are pushing some points, making some hypotheses on a bunch of paper where you don't have any clue about the way it's been developed and researched. So my point and my hypothesis is that if you develop sort of a strict methodology and you confront this methodology with peers and with people around, quickly enough you end up with something that is robust enough to be discussed with peers and also with scientists and with scholars and journalists and so on.
Thank you. I think we will have to come to a close, sadly, but I promised that we would do an ending on hope. So I wanted to bring to your attention just something that we have discussed, which was we've discussed the writings of Rebecca Solnit, in particular, some of her recent articles in The Guardian about the importance of the Me Too movement finally kind of coming to take a place in the world, of potentially sort of not exactly dismantling yet, perhaps, but certainly shaking a little bit some of the systems of power. And we discussed this in the aftermath of her book, Hope in the Dark, as we go through the exhibitions and the themes that we have been debating, the state of the world outside. It's very difficult to feel hopeless. So we wanted to bring your attention also to this book that was written 10 years ago after, in the aftermath of the Iraq War, in a similarly or also dark time. And her argument there is that hope is not optimism necessarily. That it's not the belief that things will definitely and inevitably get better. It is the recognition that the future is uncertain. And it is also a reminder that it is from the darkness that things germinate, like plants and nature germinate in the dark. And so, even though, and also hope, as according to her, is a practice. So it requires cultivation, and it so works, for example, activist work or social change don't look like success in the moment that they are happening, but they are sort of seeds planted that sometimes decades after suddenly bear fruit. And so she has been writing more recently again about how to keep hope, keep hopeful in sort of dark times, and to remind that abolition, that women's suffrage, the fall of the Berlin Wall, all of those things were considered impossible once, and then they sort of ended up happening. So I think we agreed to sort of end on a hopeful note. So I think, Georgina, you have something to say on this note? About UK politics, no? You wanted to, you were worried about...
Yeah. Is this the obvious thing that you hear? Well,
I think you before coming here, I think you were very concerned about the state. We
had local, not general elections across bits of the UK on Thursday, which, to be honest, the results have not been, from a left-wing perspective, have not been fantastic, but there have been literal green shoots from other parts of that, as well as people that we know who are close to us who have been successful in their endeavours. I think I also to kind of speak to the Solnit part, she talks in a recent interview about, I think, which also echoes the stuff on kind of technological heroism as well. Of, we have our idea of the hero. The hero is going to be the charismatic person who saves us. We have the idea of the charismatic technology is going to be the thing that kind of does us. And she says, no, it's about the networks. It's about the slow stuff. It's about the stuff which is steadily growing and built in piecemeal ways. And those are the kind of infrastructures that can, as you say, carry us through. I read that and was just like, yes, all right, we can work with that. That feels good.
Anything to add?
Sure. Yeah, so for my part, hope was not really part of my daily vocabulary. And I ended up in exchange with a repair and maintenance scholar called Stephen Jackson. He's very interesting if you don't know about him. And during this discussion, he came with one of the papers he was writing at the time. It was during the pandemic. It's called Ordinary Hope. Yeah. And it's incredible, it's super good. And also it helped me to embrace the fact that hope is not just a wish, it's not like a bet on the future. Hope can be thought about as a practice. And he based that on studies of indigenous, feminist and queer histories, and also anthropologist studies that have studied how communities are building systems of resilience in a way that is thought about as a way of embodying hope as a method, as a practice. So like, you know, social systems that are built to create hopeful system arrangement and structures. So it's very mind-changing. I mean, it really produces something when you start to embrace hope in this way as something that we are building together, and that is a practice, is you know, embodied and materialized.
Thank you. Thank you both for your generosity, and thank you for your attention. Okay.
Thank you.